Uh, as Bill said, it's Palm Sunday. And by the late 4th century, the week preceding Easter was celebrated as Holy Week. This was a jam-packed week for Jesus, our way shower. We have images of a triumphant and joyous ride on a donkey into Jerusalem, the cursing of a fig tree, the temple outburst, betrayal by Judas, denial by Peter, and the brutal parade towards crucifixion. Jackie Fernandez, in the latest Unity magazine, um, gives these positive images that support the idea of holy. The ride into Jerusalem, crowds eagerly listening to Jesus teach, an unlikely anointing of Jesus by a woman, breaking bread among friends, a new commandment to love, the humble washing of feet, generous healing, a mother's devotion, and the grace showed by Jesus to the criminals hanging beside him on the crosses. It's interesting that the Gospel writers talk of two groups of disciples, the 12 and the women. Just as predicted, most of the 12 abandoned Jesus. It was the women who remained at his side through death, burial, and resurrection. And it's in Holy Week that the women really shine. And I love the story of the unnamed woman from Bethany who, while Jesus dined at the home of Simon the leper just days before his death, gate-crashed the gathering. Accounts vary, but the Gospel of John says she's the sister of Martha and Lazarus, and therefore I think Mary Magdalene. Yeah. She anoints Jesus, bathes his feet in a mixture of perfume and tears, and wipes his feet with her hair. And I love that one. This is in a culture where a woman's touch is forbidden. The disciples were very angry. And it's only in the upside down world of Jesus that this could happen. And it's fascinating to note that when Mark has Jesus predict that this story will always be told in memory of the daring, rebellious woman that Jesus completely accepted, Mark leaves her nameless. Jesus would later imitate Mary by washing the disciples' feet and telling them to do the same. But back to the actual Palm Sunday. This is the day that all four Gospels tell the story of the triumphant procession of Jesus into Jerusalem. Modern scholars such as Spong and Robin Mayers give convincing arguments in favour of the theory that the Easter story was developed over time to support the predictions from Psalms and especially Zechariah in the Old Testament that tell of the coming of the new Messiah to set the people free. That being said, it's agreed that the rebel teacher was crucified, and Marcus Borg and Crossan have written a book called The Last Week, and apparently there are dozens of books called The Last Week, written on that last week. And in their book, they state that Jesus rode into Jerusalem from the Eastern Gate on what we now call Palm Sunday. And there would definitely have been another procession that ended from the Western Gate. That was Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. He would have been present because of the Passover, when the city swelled from 40,000 to 200,000 pilgrims or more. Pilate brought troops with him to oversee the potentially explosive festival, celebrating the Jewish people's liberation from their early captivity by the Egyptian Empire. Pilate's procession displayed imperial power as well as Roman theology that stated that the emperor was not only the ruler of the vast Roman Empire, but the Son of God. Until his entry into Jerusalem, Jesus' ministry had been about among humble folk. When he proceeded to move on to overthrowing the tables of the money changers in the temple, he made enemies of the priests, the elders and the scribes of his own faith, and that the Romans used them to collect the taxes and keep order among the Jews. This incident is deemed by the scholars of the Jesus Seminar to very probably have really happened, and it was this act that led to the crucifixion. Borg and Crossing offered this challenge. 2 processions entered Jerusalem that day. The same question, the same alternative faces those who would be faithful to Jesus today. Which procession are we in? Which procession do we want to be in? And this is the question of Palm Sunday, a week that is about to unfold. We can interpret the imperial procession to symbolise power, will and the ego of the old ways. The procession of the rebel Jesus riding on a humble donkey, which was probably associated with peace, who dared to welcome sinners, the poor, the sick, the downtrodden, represented the new way of love and compassion. His procession was welcomed with cries of, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." The Roman emperor was greeted in the same way. However, Jesus' crowd also shouted Hosanna as they waved palm branches. And Hosanna means save us. And one writer suggests this meant save us from Rome. The palm branches were another sign of rebellion, as they were a symbol of the Maccabean revolt that expelled the Greeks from Israel 200 years before. Charles Fillmore in Keep a True Lent says that Jerusalem, the holy city, symbolises the habitation of peace within us. The possession of peace, vision of peace, abode of prosperity within us. Jerusalem, he says, symbolises the great nerve centre at the back of the heart, and from this point, spirit sends out its radiance to all parts of the body. There's a little bit of irony in that about Jerusalem in this current day now that we have to overcome. Here is what Charles says about contacting this centre. I'm letting go of old mortal beliefs, and the divine within is flaming higher and higher. Its pure white light is infusing all my surroundings with a delightful spirit of wisdom, dignity and peace. I realise more and more the law of righteous thinking that is bringing me into a consciousness of my perfect dominion. A consciousness of higher dominion is what Jesus' procession was all about, although in truth most of it is caught up in the mistaken belief that we have to keep up appearances and hide behind our ego construction. We wouldn't be here if we weren't following the beliefs symbolised in the procession led by the fearless, subversive rebel. His message was not that of salvation from sin, but an invitation to abide in love and compassion in a procession where we all belong to each other. Robin Mars says that in the early Gospel of Thomas, there's nothing about resurrection or atonement, but only reference to an abiding presence that sustained the followers of Jesus after his death. And it was only in the 9th and 10th decades of the Common Era that we hear the Easter story with a physical resurrection. How amazingly powerful that presence was to create the revolution of thought that followed and has continued to touch the lives of saints and mystics and all of us to this day. And we all feel the presence in our own individual ways. And here I've just put down some of them. An overall sense of well-being, feeling at one with nature, being in silence in meditation, awareness of synchronicities, trusting our inner guidance and not outward appearances. And Julian spoke last week, and he's a great example of that, trusting that a house would turn up, overwhelming, life-changing, mystical experiences. And I think that John Paul Roach, whose book we might do this afternoon, who said sometimes we need to put a skin on the ineffable as well. So some of us experience the presence through visions of Jesus, of angels, images from other traditions, and even in my case, Tinkerbell. I've told you the story of me being on a retreat and we had to come up with our own spirit guides, and everybody was saying Jesus or an angel or Kuan Yin or somebody, and mine was clearly Tinkerbell. And the message was, lighten up, and that's a message that Pam Grout mentions, and I'll mention her later. So Tinkerbell has stayed with me. So the other thing that I was going to mention about synchronicities, that we all have those feelings, don't we? One of the most amazing synchronicities for me has been the symbol of the rainbow. And when my father died, and I know I've told you this story, I was driving along the Strand at Williamstown, and there was a rainbow, and I felt my father's presence and pulled over because he was in lodge, and the rainbow was the symbol of the level he was at. And a couple of years later, I went down to my Rudolf Steiner class, and there was a rainbow, and I pulled in and felt my father's presence again, and didn't go in. I waited, I was late going into the class, but it was such a real sense of presence. And then that was on a Tuesday night. I went in to see my mother, who by then was in an aged care facility, on the Friday, and as I walked in, the staff were saying to me, your mother says her time's up because your father's with her. And when I walked into Mum, she said, yep, my time's up, your father's hanging around. They were her exact words. And when I first gave a talk here, Jeanette came with a picture of a rainbow that she'd taken on her way, and when we sold our house a couple of years ago, one of our neighbours took a picture of the house with a rainbow over it. So amazing synchronicities, and the universe sort of obeying me or something, guiding me, whatever. So St. Paul's road to Damascus conversion continues to be played out when people of all faiths contact the presence of the transcendent realm. And I've got a couple of examples here. One of those is Paul Hasselbeck. And in one of his books, he mentions how he prayed and Jesus came to him. But in one of Paul Hasselbeck's classes, he actually says something like, Jesus got into bed and spooned him. He felt a physical sort of hugging from Jesus. Spooned is definitely Paul Hasselbeck's work. And another example of that is I've got a very good friend who's heavily into alternative traditions and spiritualism and all of that, but he will not accept other than the fact that Jesus is the Son of God, because he was wondering what to do, and the youth club coordinator said to John one night when he dropped him off at home, if I were you, I'd get down on my knees and pray to God, pray to Jesus for guidance. And John did that, and Jesus actually came to John and told him to stop his job, go back to uni, and John became a very happy, fulfilled university lecturer. But he refuses to think that Jesus isn't divine because of that bit like Paul, a life-changing experience. So we're in this magnificent procession, but everyday life can still get on top of us. John Paul Roach says, the presence of spirit within each human being is in each human being, and indeed all sentient beings throughout the cosmos. The apparent forgetting of that divinity is a story told throughout all world religions, just as is the journey to return, and that's the important bit. We've become enamoured with the world of matter or form, creating a sense of being less than, a small, insignificant blip in the grand order of things. Awakening to even an inkling of our divinity can change everything. And in this same magazine, there's an interview with Pam Grout. She's the one who translated A Course in Miracles into trendy language. And she says, the dude is the loving, abundant and totally hip force in the universe, commonly known as God. Her interview covers divine guidance, surrender and the value of lightening up, just as Tinkerbell says. She shares anecdotes about how she practices being in the presence and how her guidance and trust has increased with experience. She started with the little things that we all probably started with, such as parking places, spaces. We all done that? And I know I've told you this story. When I came to Unity, I got into that one. And I started designating 2 places in Hamilton Place Square and Mount Waverley. And after quite a long time, Jim said to me, it's really amazing that that parking place is always there for you. So Pam Grout wanted to become a full-time writer and asked for clear guidance. And the next day she went into work and was fired. She says, that's a sign you couldn't miss, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me. She also talks about the death of her daughter at 25 years of age. And she's clear right from the beginning, her daughter Taz has been working with her from the other side. And they have a wonderful charity giving grants to those who work to make a difference for others. Pam Grout tells of having written the book that became E Squared 10 years before it was published. It was originally called God Doesn't Have Bad Hair Days, and it didn't really take off. She says she wasn't deterred and kept celebrating how lucky she was to be a freelance writer, doing what she loved. Years later, her spiritual guidance nudged her to have another try, and the book's now been translated into 40 languages. This underscores the idea that if things don't go the way you expect, hang on, because you might not have all the information yet. Things certainly didn't go the way the disciples expected on the jubilant Palm Sunday. Their leader ended up, in their eyes, humiliated and crucified. How could they have envisaged the tsunami effect of Jesus' life? His pure teachings are universal. Care for the sick and downtrodden, care for each other, and trust that despite outward appearances, we are all one with each other and the great power of the universe. And Roach calls this the golden thread. Yeah. His new commandment to love one another overcame the power of the Roman Empire and remains our guiding principle 2,000 years later. We're blessed to be in the procession of love and compassion together, supporting each other in our own individual ways, in changing our thought one word and deed at a time. And it doesn't have to be much. I've just got the image of a little boy as I was in the car waiting to turn, and this little 2.5-year-old boy was walking along with his mother pushing a pram, and the little boy held up his hand to me to stop, and that made me so happy. So it doesn't take much for us to change the world, one deed at a time, to bring cheer and goodwill. So my idea was that we would have this is my commandment, and then we'll do meditation. What do you think? Yes. You can vote on it. Yeah? Okay.